it like it almost instantly like changed their view of it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, luckily they got to see just like how well it can go, how peaceful it was.
Yeah.
And so yeah, all that resistance that I had had before when I was planning my first birth completely disappeared when I said I wanted to have a home birth the second time.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody piped in. Nobody told me it was a bad idea. They had just kind of seen that like it went great and they could just see all these like positive sides to it and that fear
Mm-hmm.
like totally disappeared. And I think people just had a little bit more trust in me that because it's what I wanted to do, like that should be respected. That,
Yeah.
like I knew what I was doing. I had thought about this, I had researched it, and it was the best way for me to go.
Mm-hmm.
So definitely it was a whole different thing going into the second one because I just
Yeah.
felt like there was no more and I wasn't as worried, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I didn't feel like I had to really convince people.
Hey, you're listening to Empowered Births at Home with me, Esmeralda, the home birth doula, as your host. I am a mama of three, fellow home birther, and entrepreneur. I am completely obsessed with birth, more specifically, home birth. And this is a podcast where women share their empowering home birth stories, along with the journey that led them down the path to home birth. Whether you're currently pregnant, planning a home birth with your first or fourth baby, or even just someone who is a complete birth nerd like me, this is the podcast for you. So let's get into this week's empowering home birth story. We are on episode 38. We'll be chatting with Tori about her home births and about her book that she has as well called Ready to Unpop. Let's go ahead and bring Tori on.
Hi, thanks for having me. My name is Tori. I am from Canada, living in British Columbia, and I am a mom of two, and I also have one on the way. So I'm 30 weeks pregnant at the moment. I'm also an author. So I wrote a book shortly after my second was born. And the book is all about home birth and all the alternative styles of parenting, I guess you could say. So I used cloth diapers and I co-slept and I was doing breastfeeding past a year. So I did all those kind of alternative and natural things that you think about when you think about birth and babies. And I wanted
Mm-hmm.
to share with people my experiences and also just show people that it's an option for everyone because I think a
Yeah.
lot of people see it as this kind of like fringe or alternative thing, or maybe like it's just for hippies or it's just for a certain kind of
Mm-hmm.
mom. And yeah, I'm really passionate about sharing stories like this. This is why I love your podcast as well. It gets people to see that this is like an option.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. That's
Mhm.
awesome.
Yeah.
And so, did you have your first at home, or was that kind of the journey to home birth?
Well, my first one was not planned to be at home. So
Okay.
that's kind of an interesting story because I had learned about home birth. I was interested in it, but I didn't have the support around me to make me feel like I could do it.
Mm,
Um, and at the time, I think I wasn't like confident enough in my feeling about
yeah.
it. So I let other people sway me and we ended up not planning for a home birth. But sure enough, it was just like such a quick, a fast labor that he ended up
Mm,
being born at home.
wow.
And so it was kind of like, I don't know, you could almost say I manifested it or something because it was sort of what I was hoping for. And it ended up working out that way.
Mm-hmm.
And it was such a positive experience for me and for my partner and for the people who were there to see like how it just went so well and how
Yeah.
my midwife happened to be there. She came to my house to check on me and that
Mm,
made us all feel more at ease as well. So yeah, so the first one wasn't planned at home, but it did end up being that way. And it went so well that we did plan the second one to be at home.
yeah, that's awesome.
hmm
Do you remember how you kind of first learned about home birth before that, and what made you even start thinking about wanting to have that?
Absolutely. There was like a very specific experience in my life that opened my eyes to home birth. Because if you had asked me growing up, I would have definitely said I would have had a baby in a hospital.
Hmm.
I would have thought that that's just like where everyone does it. And
Yeah.
I honestly wouldn't have even known home birth was like a thing. Like
Hmm.
that's how much it like wasn't on my radar before when I was growing up. It was just, like everyone I knew like just did it the hospital way, and that's just what I thought I would do.
Yeah.
But when I was younger, like in my early 20s, one of my friends got pregnant. She was like the first of our friend group to get pregnant. And I'd gone out to visit her because she lived in a different city at the time. And
Okay.
I wanted to be there with her around that time that I wasn't there for the birth, but just very close to her birth.
Mm,
And so I was there for some of her midwife appointments and for her preparation. And she was thinking about having a home birth.
mm,
And so I got to watch a birth documentary with her about home birth, The Business of Being Born. You've probably heard
okay.
of it.
Yeah.
And wow, like that was so eye-opening. And then I got to go to her midwife appointments, and her midwife was so interesting. It was like this woman who had, I think, like 5 or 6 kids
Mm.
herself, and she had even had a twin home birth.
Oh,
And
wow.
she was sharing a bit about that. And I just thought, like, wow, this is so crazy and interesting.
Hmm.
And yeah, like I thought it was a bit out there at first, but
Hmm.
the more I got to know it about it, the more that I became interested in thinking like I think I might do something like this when it comes time for me to have babies. So it
Okay.
definitely took someone like teaching me and showing me that side
Hmm.
before I was like willing to consider it for myself.
Yeah,
Hmm.
definitely. That's awesome that she kind of brought you into it without even being someone who was kind of like pushy about it. It was more about her
Right.
experience and you were kind of just there for like the ride. So that's
That's
cool.
right. Yeah, I got to witness it and just like really see it from that sort of inside perspective. It was great.
Hmm. Yeah, awesome.
Hmm.
And so after you had your first, was there any conversation that like you and your partner had about like the thoughts before of not having the home birth and not planning for it, and now from now on, I want to have home births? Was there like that kind of conversation?
Definitely. Yeah, it was just so good and so eye-opening because not only was my husband there, but my mom and my sister as well. And for them to actually see me in a home birth setting and see how the midwife had handled it so well, it like it almost instantly like changed their view of it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, luckily they got to see just like how well it can go, how peaceful it was.
Yeah.
And so yeah, all that resistance that I had had before when I was planning my first birth completely disappeared when I said I wanted to have a home birth the second time.
Hmm.
Nobody piped in. Nobody told me it was a bad idea. They had just kind of seen that like it went great and they could just see all these like positive sides to it and that fear
Hmm.
like totally disappeared. And I think people just had a little bit more trust in me that because it's what I wanted to do, like that should be respected. That,
Yeah.
like I knew what I was doing. I had thought about this, I had researched it, and it was the best way for me to go.
Hmm.
So definitely it was a whole different thing going into the second one because I just
Yeah.
felt like there was no more and I wasn't as worried, right? Like
Hmm.
I didn't feel like I had to really convince people because it was like, okay, you know what? I've done this once.
Hmm.
And it was definitely like the way to go for me. And I just had no hesitations. And I was just more confident. I wasn't bothered by the people who thought it was risky or like
Hmm.
wanted to try to talk me out of it. I just
Yeah.
like that no longer bothered me.
Yeah. That's
Hmm.
awesome.
Yeah.
And so going into your second home birth, was there any like planning or preparation that you did differently than the first because you weren't actually planning a home birth for the first one?
Yeah, definitely. It was so different. One thing I really learned with the first one being unplanned was that you do not need as much as you think
Hmm.
because we had like no preparation.
Yeah.
And I remember my midwife, she came to check on me and yeah, it had only been like a few hours since my first contraction. So everyone thought I was like not near the end, but I was.
Yeah.
And so she checked and she's like, "You're 9 centimeters. Like, I think this baby's coming soon. How would you feel about having a home birth?" And I was like, yes, like I on right away. It was like no question in my mind. I was just like, yeah, I don't want to like go get in a car right now. Like, let's do
Hmm.
this. So all she really asked for, she's like, "Do you have any towels?" Like, and that was like all we needed. It
Yeah.
was so funny. So like, yeah, anyone who's listening right now, if you feel like you're not prepared enough, you'd be amazed at how little you actually do need.
Hmm.
But the second one, we definitely put a little bit more like planning and preparation, especially as far as like the second time we rented a birth pool.
Mm.
And so we had like a pool set up and we just had a few more supplies on hand.
Yeah.
My midwife had given me like a list of things to prepare for home birth. So it was just checking off, making sure we had everything on the list. But it was helpful to go through that first one, knowing that like really like you just need some towels, a pile of
Hmm.
towels, and that's about it. And the midwife had some equipment on hand as well, like in her car.
Yeah.
So yeah, we had like everything we needed. We did not need that much. And that's like, I don't know, I think that says so much about birth. Like sometimes people
Hmm.
think you need like equipment and gadgets and things, and it's like you don't need too much, right?
Yeah.
A few towels and you're good.
Hmm. Yeah, I've had some clients who have told me like, "Oh, I haven't ordered my birth kit yet. Like I'm worried it's not going to come in time." I'm like, "Don't freak out because really all you need are the towels and you have
Yeah.
those at home. So if it
Yeah.
doesn't come in time, like it's fine." There's so many people who
Uh-huh.
order it like early and then don't even use anything from it and it's just sitting there because it either happened so fast that they didn't have time to use anything or whatever. So I'm like,
Hmm.
yeah, it's perfectly fine if it doesn't come in on time. Like you really don't need it, like 100% need it. It
Hmm.
could be helpful for some things, but it's not
Definitely.
like a guarantee of like, oh, I need all of this to be here or I can't have a home birth. That's not
Right.
true. So
Yeah,
yeah.
you maybe don't need as much as you think you do.
Hmm.
But certainly there are like some yeah, nice things to have. Or even there were things I had planned like to have candles out or to like, put a
Hmm.
certain playlist on. And I like all those comfort items as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, like you say, it's not always guaranteed that you're even gonna get to that. So
Hmm.
yeah, it can be a little more simple than people realize.
Yeah, definitely.
Hmm.
Was there anything else you did in preparation for the home birth? Like any courses or like more education, anything like that?
I never did take birth courses, although I do recommend it to
Hmm.
people if they're interested. But I found my doula, like I hired a doula,
Hmm.
and she was like my just go-to for all my questions. And I don't know, I felt like I got like so much out of her. Like she was just such a great
Yeah.
resource for me that yeah, she was kind of like my guide along the way. Like she wasn't just there for the birth, but she was there to like answer every single question we had, and she really helped me feel prepared.
Hmm.
So that was kind of my like professional resource as far as
Yeah.
preparing.
Hmm.
Yeah. And then I just found I just was really focused on like self-care and like maybe doing some yoga or just moving my body and connecting to the baby. Those are the other kinds of things that I focus on doing kind of on my own that help
Hmm.
me feel prepared.
Yeah.
And listening to podcasts.
Yeah.
Podcasts were really helpful to me. So hearing other people's stories,
Hmm.
I found that to be one of the most helpful things for me. But it helped me feel prepared to know what to expect, just to hear other positive examples of people who had done it. I'd say that was almost
Yeah.
probably the most helpful thing for me.
Hmm. Yeah. That's awesome. I do love when a lot of people have good experiences with like having a doula and them being able to just be kind of like this huge resource for them and like a fountain of information where they
Hmm.
can get everything from them and not have to take like all these courses or read all these books or do all these things. For some people, they really do like having the course or reading the books.
Hmm.
But also some people just like having one source that they can go to for everything. And a doula
Hmm.
is really great for that. So I love that that's how you use your doula and she was able to provide that for you too.
Yeah. Oh, she was fantastic. Like I can't say enough good things about doulas.
Hmm.
Love
Yeah,
them.
that's awesome. And so going into how like labor started with your second, what was kind
Mhm.
of the very first thing that started it all?
So it's funny, we were just a few days ahead of the due date. So we knew it was, around the corner, but not necessarily expecting it to be that day.
Mm,
But there were just like a few things that happened that it's almost convinced me that the baby like knows when you're ready or when you're
mm,
not. Because my mom had been out of town and she was just coming back to Calgary. I lived in Calgary at the time. She was just coming back that day and she took my older child, my son, for a sleepover. And
mm,
I really felt like just like having her return. like cued the baby that like, okay, I'm ready now. Like you can come
Yeah.
now. Because yeah, it was that night I went out for dinner with my husband. And the other interesting thing was we went out for like a nice like Italian meal. And normally we would love to have like some dessert with it. And I just remember feeling like, oh, I'm not really feeling dessert. Like
Mm.
it was just my body was just kind of cueing me that I just had eaten enough.
Yeah.
And I look back on that moment actually. I think, like when you're really tuned in with your body,
Mm-hmm.
eh, like I really think it was kind of telling me that you're getting ready for birth soon. Like you don't want to overeat or I don't know.
Yeah.
But that's how it worked out. So we went out for dinner and came home and yeah, I just started feeling like those contractions. You just at first you feel a little crampy
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, but then there gets to be a point where you're like, okay, no, this is happening, like something's starting.
Yeah.
So yeah, so it just it began that way, and because my first one had gone so fast, I was a little bit more on like high alert. Like I felt like, oh, I need to
Mm.
call everyone right away because this could like end up going really fast, like the first one.
Yeah.
And it didn't go quite that way. So one thing I would say too is that like if you're on your second birth, you want to not assume that it's going to be like similar to the first or like just make
Mhm.
any assumptions at all. It's better to treat them all like very individually because they can be so different.
Yeah.
Because the difference with the second one is that although my contractions started, we end up kind of hitting a little wall where like everything kind of stopped. It kind of went on
Hmm.
hold. And that was new to me because before it was
Okay.
very like everything picked up and it just started going, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, the second was a bit different for me that way. It started and then it kind of tapered off.
Mm.
And we had like a little bit of a quiet period where I was wondering, was this a false alarm?
Yeah.
Should I not have called everybody? Um, but in that moment when it did slow down, it was my doula who suggested like, why don't we just like take a break from timing? Let's not time the contractions. Let's just maybe put a movie on or something and just, not focus on this and just
Yeah.
relax. And so that's what we did. We like put on a movie. It was like the middle of the night. And we put on Titanic, a really long movie, which was good. And yeah, like sure enough, I just kind of sat myself in like a quiet, dark corner. And
Mm-hmm.
that's when the contractions like started picking up again.
Mm.
So that was really good advice again from my doula. It was like, let's just take the pressure off and
Yeah.
just get quiet and you know, it'll come back. Like, the contractions will start once you feel quiet and safe and just less pressure.
Yeah. Definitely. That's
Mhm.
awesome. At that point, was everyone still there? So, like, everyone that you had called, were they just like in another room, or what happened at that point?
Yeah, I called everyone like kind of as soon as I knew contractions were coming on regularly. And then
Hmm.
so that was my doula showed up. My mom came. This time my brother was also there.
Mm.
Which is great. I wanted, not everyone wants like men in the birth space, but I really just felt like I wanted my brother there that time.
Yeah.
And it was great. He's a very like good support person for me, so it was
Mm.
wonderful. And my husband was there. So my doula did stay, even though the contractions weren't so regular. She did stay and kind of waited it out until they picked up back up again.
Okay.
And bless her heart too, because she had just come from another birth that was almost like 24 hours long. And that's the other thing. It made me feel so guilty for calling her too early because,
Mm.
I thought I was gonna need her like right away, and then it looked like
Hmm.
maybe I didn't. But she was great. She got a few hours of sleep in between before she did come to my place, and that's just the life of a doula. Like sometimes the births happen all at once. Um,
Yeah, definitely. That's
yeah.
something a lot of people will always say that they're like, they feel so bad about or they're scared about doing is like, I don't want to call you too soon, or I don't know like when the right time is to call. What if it's like you have to go back home? And something
hmm
I always tell them, and I feel like a lot of doulas have this perspective, is we go into this work knowing that like that's just the life of birth. Like
hmm
that's the whole point of even like if you're attending home births, knowing that the reason they're having a home birth is because they don't want it planned or like an induction at the hospital or like a planned cesarean or anything like that, where you know exactly
Mhm.
the date and time. So we know all of that going into it. And most of us don't mind like getting an early call and just going back home or staying like really long. And it's just part of what we do. So I'm always like, don't feel bad about it. Don't worry about it. Like that should be the least of your worries while you're in labor and like contracting and trying to focus. You
Mhm.
shouldn't be like worrying about that in the back of your head. So I always make sure people know that. Like don't even worry about it. Just call when you feel like you need a call.
That's really nice to hear you say that. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
I think a lot of us do feel guilty
Hmm.
and just even as women or just I don't know, it like just receiving support, receiving help can be hard sometimes. Like just
Hmm.
asking for
Yeah.
help and really have someone like catering to you. But if there's ever a time that you deserve it more, like it's birth, like during your
Yeah.
birth, you deserve so much support around you
Hmm.
and yeah, that's not the time to be like a people pleaser or
Yes.
feeling guilty.
Hmm.
No, like that is the time to really like accept that help and support because you need it. And it's, yeah,
Hmm.
I think everyone deserves it in that
Yeah.
moment. Hmm.
Definitely. And so your doula stayed. Did anyone else stay as well, or did they kind of leave until you called them again?
Everybody stayed. It was, we just kind of, yeah, we put the movie on. And so
Hmm.
people were just kind of watching the movie and I was in my own little like quiet corner. So
Okay.
I felt like I was in my own little bubble.
Hmm.
And that was nice. Like even my doula, even though she stayed, she really gave me space.
Yeah.
And she just I knew she was kind of listening in on me and kind of
Hmm.
she could tell when the contractions were picking up, but she wasn't in my space. She was
Hmm.
just like allowing me to just like get into that zone. Yeah, and I think my brother and my husband, they both fell asleep on the couch during the movie for a little bit, which is fine because again, this was like an all-nighter, so it was good if anyone could kind of get a little bit of sleep during that time.
Yeah.
And then we were joking too. We were taking bets on like what scene in the movie was like gonna like have the baby and like guessing like was it when the Titanic's going down? It turns out though that it took longer than the movie before
Mm.
baby came. But yeah, it was
Mhm.
just kind of guessing and just anticipating like how the night was gonna go. But it went all through the night into the morning.
Yeah. Awesome. At what point did you feel kind of a shift? Was it during the movie or after the movie that things like really picked up for you?
Well, I remember there was a big focus on my water breaking, or
Mm.
it hadn't broken yet.
Yeah.
And that was like one piece that really changed the momentum of it.
Okay.
So before the water broke, it was kind of like, okay, yes, my contractions are picking up and yes, it's happening, but it just felt like my midwife had come over eventually, like kind of in the early morning when things just felt more intense. But she had said, I'm guessing like when your waters break, that things are
Mm.
really going to start going. So
Yeah.
so then all of a sudden it was like, okay, let's start like doing stairs, let's start doing some lunges. Like we were trying to get the water to break if we could like without my midwife like actually doing it.
Hmm.
And so we were trying different things and um, she suggested maybe sitting on the toilet and then just like really bearing down with the contractions. And that's what did it. Like
Okay.
sitting on the toilet and the toilet, as you know, is like a good place for kind of like releasing.
Hmm.
And so yeah, I think like second contraction when I was sitting on the toilet, we just all heard that like water break.
Mm.
And that was all of a sudden it just seemed to like totally ramp up. Like the intensity just like went way up for me.
Yeah.
It got like way more uncomfortable,
Hmm.
but it was also like that's what was needed. It was like the next step to really get things moving. It was like the baby was now just like locked and loaded.
Yeah.
And yeah, and then it wasn't long after that. So for me,
Hmm.
that was like the moment it all kind of shifted, and that was like where she was ready to come.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And so right after that, how kind of did the remainder of the birth go until she was born?
So that around that point was when I got into the birth tub, the birth pool,
Mm.
and which was helpful. It's I liked this was the first time I'd been in water, right? The first one we didn't have a pool, so I liked that change of environment, especially
Mm.
when things were starting to feel quite uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And my son had just woken up too. And so he kind of came into we were kind of like, we had the pool set up in the dining room because that was just
Mm.
the space that we had. So he kind of came up for breakfast and was kind of curious what was going on.
Yeah.
But yeah, it all like, he was there and like he came to hold my hand and my husband was holding my hand and it all just like moved very quickly from there. It
Mm.
was like into the pool and then I was like getting that urge to push and it didn't take like many pushes at all. And yeah, she was ready and yeah, she was born in the pool there and in the dining room.
Yeah.
And it was very cool. Yeah.
That's awesome. Who was the one to catch baby? Was it like your husband or the midwife? Did you have anyone designated for that?
I didn't like have anyone specifically designated. And what I found, and this happened to me both times, is once the head comes out first, and then there's a bit of a pause, and then usually, the shoulders, and then the rest of the baby comes. It kind of comes in that like two stage.
Yeah.
And for me, when the head comes out first, it's almost like time just like stands still. Like I feel like it's taking forever for the
Yeah.
next contraction to come.
Mm-hmm.
So both times I think I was kind of asking the midwife, like, I don't know when the next contraction is coming. Like, can you help me? Like I didn't know if I was supposed to keep waiting too long or I felt like it was taking too long.
Yeah.
So I did ask for the midwife to come in and kind of like have a look and maybe like, just like help the baby out. So the midwives did like work with me, but they
Yeah.
helped that like final like pulling the baby out.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, now that I'm planning my third home birth, I
Yeah.
think about that moment a little bit more, and I think like I want to be the one if I can and if I feel good in that moment to
Mm-hmm.
like just I the plan is for midwives to basically be completely hands off
Mm-hmm.
unless I like call them in for that like hands-on support, but I'm hoping that it can just like be me, like just me and the baby doing that whole moment there by ourselves.
Yeah.
That's my plan.
Definitely. That's
Hmm.
awesome. That was something that I wanted to do for my third as well. Like I had planned, like, okay, I'm gonna grab the baby and I'm gonna be the first one to touch the baby. And it
Hmm.
was just so strange because in that moment I felt like I couldn't move. I
Oh
just
yeah.
like couldn't move from the position I was in. I felt like I couldn't like bend over, kind of like crouching to
Hmm.
grab the baby. So I was like, I can't do it. I can't do it. And
Right.
so my mom ended up catching the baby
Oh,
and placing
neat.
her to me. So I thought that was really cool. But yeah, it was funny, just like kind of how we make plans, but sometimes they don't happen. But also, it's good to make those plans and know like what you want so that if you can do it, then everybody knows like, okay, the plan is for her to do it. So let her go do it.
Yes.
Definitely.
Oh, I'm glad you bring that point up too, because so this is something I talk about in my book, and I've had like it's been a bit controversial because
Mm,
I talk about how like you shouldn't have too rigid of a birth plan. And
mm-hmm.
I know a lot of like birth workers and stuff are very like pro birth plan. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not that I'm really exactly anti birth plan, but
Yeah.
I've just seen like in my own experience and others, like you say, like it doesn't always go exactly how you picture it. Doesn't mean
Mm-hmm.
that it's gonna go bad or
Yeah.
wrong, but sometimes you can get like too sticky in this idea of like exactly how it's gonna go.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I've found like even with my first, like being a home birth when that wasn't planned,
Mm-hmm.
um, even though it was such a positive experience, it was like a good change of plans. But there's something about staying like a little bit open and a little bit flexible, or just knowing that you can't control everything.
Yeah.
But I would never say like, oh, just like don't have a plan and just go in blind. Like
Yeah.
that's not what I would ever tell
Mm-hmm.
anyone. It's like you should always be prepared and kind of know the options and know your preferences and make sure your
Yeah.
birth team knows your preferences. Like,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, like basically I just say like don't laminate the plan. Like it don't
Mm-hmm.
it's not going to be like it might not be exactly how you want it to go or I think it's going to go, but it doesn't mean it's going to
Yeah.
be in a bad way at all.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
just so many things can change and come up and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's a very like I don't know, it's like just it's very unpredictable in a
Hmm.
sense, right? Yeah, there's certain things you can control, and then there's other parts that you just can't and you can't predict.
Yeah, definitely. I always make that like a big point whenever I'm with any clients and we are making like a birth plan because I do help them with their birth plan and like creating one. But I'm
Mhm.
always very adamant about, okay, but this is not set in stone. We have to remember
Mhm.
that. Like we can plan all we want, but birth is going to go the way it's going to go. Sometimes we don't have
Absolutely.
control over it, and that's okay. Like it's okay to surrender to not having full control of your birth.
Oh,
And that's
absolutely.
like the biggest thing. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think like having trust in yourself and your body is the number one thing. Because that
Hmm.
leaves it open to like no matter how it goes, I know that like I'll be okay.
Yeah.
Instead of feeling like I'll only be okay if it goes exactly this way, right? So
Hmm.
so that like that just like encompassing trust, I think is like the main thing. And just knowing like, okay, like however this goes is how it's supposed to go and it's going to be good. Even the friend that I mentioned at the beginning who had the home birth, she had a birth pool and she ended up not getting into the pool.
Mm.
And that was something I think I took like a mental note of that at the time. She said, we had the pool all ready to go and I was
Yeah.
like right beside the pool and he was born. And yeah, like that was good for me to hear as well because it's like you can plan all you want, but
Hmm.
like he was born right beside the pool instead of in the pool. And
Yeah.
that's fine. Like she had a great experience as well.
Hmm.
But yeah, it was like good to sort of hear that and like take a mental note at the time.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you're kind of planning for this third birth?
There's not too much that I'm planning different. The only real difference is that I'm in a new city now. So I've moved
Mm.
since my last birth. So for my first two, I had the same birth team. I had the same two midwives. I had the same doula.
Okay.
And now I'm in a new city, new team, right?
Hmm.
So that was it did kind of make me a little bit nervous in a way, like just because I had that comfort, I had those people that I knew, that I sort
Hmm.
of knew how it went before, and now, yeah, it's just like new people around me. So, but I do feel good about who I've got. I've been,
Okay.
meeting with the new midwives. I have a doula who I feel really comfortable with,
Mm.
and she comes so highly recommended. I've heard just like amazing things about
Mm.
her. And yeah, so I feel good and supported, but it's just that's just gonna be a big change for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're gonna plan to be at home, rent a pool again, plan for the water birth. I still feel good about having my kids there, unless it happens to be like when they're asleep in bed. But
Yeah.
that's something like having my son there for the second one, I felt great about. And I know some people feel nervous about that or wonder like, should I have my older older children present? And of course, it's a personal choice, but
Yeah.
I feel really good about it. I think
Hmm.
it's good for kids to see it, and they're not they're not weirded out by this kind of stuff.
Hmm.
Like we kind of project our own feelings and fears and whatnot, but
Hmm.
I'm looking forward to having my kids present if they can be. Yeah, and that's kind of all that's in the plans right now.
Hmm.
I've tried to remain really flexible. Um, and yeah, like not get too much into the de details, just knowing that like each one can go so differently. And even like I have friends here who were planning a home birth and they had something come up that eventually like they transferred to the hospital. It was not a non-emergency. It
Yeah.
was like there was like meconium in the fluid.
Yeah.
And even though it was her fourth baby, that was something new for her. And she was a bit on the fence, but decided to go to the hospital just to sort of like get checked and then
Yeah.
ended up having the baby at the hospital.
Hmm.
And I just, I take those stories into account. I kind of think, okay, you know what? There could be things that would come up that maybe would make me change the plan
Hmm.
in the moment. So I try to be really open about that, like, and just not feel too like fixed on like it's got to go this certain way.
Yeah.
But just have my plan and yeah, have my birth team and have everybody kind of ready and helping me to kind of make it happen the way I want if we can.
Hmm.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's basically all that's gone into the preparation.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah, definitely. That's awesome.
Hmm.
And so I know we've kind of talked bits and pieces about your book here and there, but is there anything that you kind of want to say about the book and like just go into it a little bit more for anyone who might be interested in it?
Yeah, so my book, it's called Ready to Unpop, a modern mama's guide to unpopular practices in maternity. Kind of a mouthful. But yeah, it's because I wanted to really, support new moms on the journey all the way from like pregnancy through the birth and labor, and then postpartum and even the early years. And yeah, it's really about options. It's not about telling anyone that they should do it the way I did it. That's a point I really wanted to get across. It's like just because I
Hmm.
liked cloth diapers doesn't mean, like everyone should, but it's more about like presenting it as an option. These are the pros, these are the cons.
Hmm.
So I tried to make it like short, easy to read, um, and covering like kind of everything that you're going to encounter on the all the way, right? From pregnancy through with like just all the tips that I've learned from going through it twice.
Hmm.
And there's even like some notes to your birth partner, your husband,
Hmm.
who might not be so familiar with this kind of thing. Because I don't
Yeah.
know about you, but in my experience, it's like I find the wives have to get the husbands on board with a lot of this stuff just because
Hmm.
they're just not familiar with it. So
Yeah.
that was another focus on the book. It's like even not just for you, but your support team as well,
Hmm.
can learn a lot about this and hopefully like support your decisions that
Yeah.
way.
I
Hmm.
love that because yeah, I cloth diaper too.
Yeah.
And with my first, we went like the regular diaper route at first, and then at I think it was 3 months or 4 months, I was like, you know what? I want to try to switch over and see like just see how it goes, right? I'll buy just a few and do it a few times. And if
Hmm.
I like it, then we'll buy more and like I'll do it full time. And my husband was like, we are not doing that.
Hmm.
He's like, that's so gross. I'm not. And I'm like, but it's not gross. Like, we're touching stuff even with doing regular diapers. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
it's not that much different. And he's like, nope, not doing it. And so he's like, if you're gonna do it, you're washing all the diapers. Like, okay, I guess I'll take on that load. It
Yeah.
took him a while to learn like how to do the cloth diapers and everything too. And it took my family time to learn too. Like, if they
Hmm.
were watching the baby, how do I use this diaper? Because it is different than a traditional just disposable diaper.
Yeah.
So yeah, I like that there's little notes for the partner to kind of help them get more support on it because yeah, it's definitely I feel like the moms that are more, I'm thinking about doing something a little bit differently, and the dad's like, I've never heard of that before.
Yeah, there can be so much resistance. And
Hmm.
that was really my whole motivation for writing the book because
Hmm.
I got so much resistance every single step of the way. Like when I told everyone I wanted cloth diapers and I it was like on my list of for my
Mm.
baby shower.
Yeah.
And my I still had an aunt who bought me like a pack of disposable diapers. Like and she said, "Oh, you're probably gonna end up using them." And it's
Yeah.
like yeah, they're just like so sure that you're not gonna like it or you're not gonna stick with it or
Hmm.
and it's like yeah, it's much better to just like have people understand and have the support and of course, you can change your mind. Maybe it won't work for everybody,
Yeah.
but it's just so much nicer when you have people who are like respectful of your decisions and like
Hmm.
supportive of them. Hmm.
Yeah, definitely. And knowing those options, that's what I really like that you said the book is about, is not trying to sway people to go the more natural route. It's more about opening their mind to, oh, I do have more options than just what everyone around me is doing and what I'm used to seeing. Maybe I
Hmm.
do want to do something different. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah, and like you touched on this at the beginning, like for me to see my friend going through it, and it wasn't her trying to tell me that it was like home birth was the way to go. It was
Hmm.
just me being able to witness that really opened my eyes. And then I had a similar experience when I was pregnant with my first. I had a friend who was also pregnant.
Mm.
And a lot of people when you're pregnant will ask you, "Oh, what hospital are you delivering at?" And
Yeah.
I just said, "Oh, are you thinking about hospital or home birth?" Like, and she had never thought about home birth.
Hmm.
And she just had her third home birth this past summer.
Wow.
And it was all just from that, like just the phrasing of the question or just asking like, hey, what are you thinking? Or, yeah. So like a lot of people, they're making these choices really because they don't know that there are other choices out there.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the biggest thing. It's like home birth is not for everyone. You know that. I know
Yeah.
that. But people deserve to kind of know and see like, yeah, what are the draws to it? Why are people choosing this? Like, what are the
Mm-hmm.
experiences like? It's so helpful. And then, yeah, I just feel like you go into it like with such a better chance of having a good experience with it because you know that like you were following what felt best for you, what was the best fit for you, right?
Yeah,
Hmm.
absolutely. I know we touched on a few things that you said are in the book, like cloth diapering, breastfeeding, birth. Is there any other topics that are kind of big in the book?
Yeah, there's definitely like a whole range. One that stands out in my mind right now is just like the emotions that we go through during pregnancy. And how, society is always treating us like we're just these crazy, emotional, irrational, like women with hormones raging. And
Mm-hmm.
it's one thing that I really like to put that whole story in a different light. And that like our emotions are really like almost like a superpower in pregnancy, and that
Mm-hmm.
we're so much more tuned in, and it's not irrational. It's like we're really like we are in a different like state, right? Like it's a
Yeah.
very powerful, heightened emotional state that's necessary for like becoming a new mother, basically. Yeah, that it's not such a bad thing or a silly thing. Yeah, like just honoring your emotions, like the things that come up, and not treating yourself like it's some kind of flaw or something. And even through the postpartum, like especially baby blues is another one I talk about because there's of course some people experience like a depression, postpartum depression after, and that's, something that's like definitely understandable and needs support. And it's good that we're talking about that. But then there's also like the baby blues, which is just sort of like this general experience that like a lot of women feel.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like to validate like just how much we're going through because sometimes it's almost like, I don't know, just ignore it. It's like you just went through a crazy experience, like just like a wild experience, right? Of just
Yeah.
like something that like you don't, just doesn't happen every day. And
Mm-hmm.
then your body's like going through so much. And then like you're like mentally you're going through such a transformation. And when, yeah, people talk about like, oh, are you emotional? Are you feeling down? It's kind of like, well, yeah, like because it's valid because of like all, all this, what I've just been through and what I'm going through and all these changes that I'm adjusting to and all these
Yeah.
new like things that I'm learning. And yeah, I think that emotional piece is sometimes like really brushed off.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that I just I want mothers to know like they're not alone, they're not crazy.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing wrong with them if they're like if you're feeling a bit down or because you're dealing with so much, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
But yeah,
awesome.
there's tons of I touch on circumcision,
Mm.
which is a very hot topic, but I think it's really important to it's something that should be like talked about and really thought through
Yeah.
before making a decision on that. Yeah, there's like there's all kinds of decisions you'll find even just in like the first day of birth where it's just going to be like, yeah, do I want this ointment? Do I want this injection? Do I want this? Like, there's so many things to think about and consider. I try to touch on all those and just remind people to like really think them through and
Yeah.
yeah, just but the biggest thing is also just trusting yourself and knowing that it's up to you to make the best decision for your baby.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it all comes back to that like trust in yourself and knowing that you're like the best advocate for your baby.
Yeah, definitely. That's
Mhm.
awesome. I really love that. How
Thanks.
can people reach you if they're kind of looking to connect with you?
So I do have a website, ready to unpop.com.
Mm.
You can find me there. You can find me on Instagram. My handle is by Tori Smith.
Mm.
And I am working on getting my book on Amazon too, so that'll be more
Okay.
accessible for more people. So that's in the works right now, so it should be available there soon. Yeah, so
Okay.
there's a few different ways. Yeah, but I'd love for people to find me, connect with me. ask me questions. Yeah, whatever you'd like.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story with us and sharing about the book as well. I feel like that's such a great resource for anyone who listens to this podcast. So it's really great that you came on to talk about all that.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. It was great.
What a great chat we had with Tori. I love everything that she shared with us. Everything in her book just sounds so resourceful and like a great amount of information for anyone who might not want to go with what society tells us is the norm and maybe wants to do things a little bit alternatively, or even is just thinking about why people choose to do any of these things alternatively. So I think it's really great that she wrote a book like this. And definitely make sure you check out all of her links below to connect with her and find her book. This is the second to last episode in season 2. So make sure if you are wanting to get onto the podcast to share your home birth story, you go down below and find the submission form link and submit your story there so that hopefully you can share your story on season 3 of the podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love for you to share with any family or friends who may benefit from these empowering stories. Also, don't forget to leave a 5-star rating and review to help others who are searching for this information find this podcast. I'll see you next week for another empowering home birth story.